Have you ever wondered why everybody these days, on the right and the left, are slinging accusations of anti Semitism at their opponents, but no one can agree on exactly what the term even means? That's because they're using the same words to describe totally different criticisms. And if you aren't tracking that switch, you'll end up as confused as they are. Just this week, Tucker Carlson interviewed U.S. Ambassador to Israel and former Baptist preacher Mike Huckabee. Huckabee thought this was going to be a friendly, but he ended up getting blindsided by Carlson, who absolutely grilled him on betraying U.S. interests on behalf of the foreign government of Israel. It was not a friendly exchange. So, how did two pillars of the MAGA establishment end up on opposite ends of its foreign policy towards one of its longest standing allies? Two competing factions, Christian Zionism versus Christian nationalism. And as we speak, they are duking it out for the future of the Republican Party. Huckabee is part of a long tradition called Christian Zionism that included MLK Jr., but really went viral after the Left Behind series of books in the 70s and 80s that popularized the idea that the second coming of Jesus was only going to happen after a war to end all wars kicks off in Jerusalem. Jesus would then come down, duke it out with the Antichrist, beam all the believers up to the mothership, and the Jews, they'd all see the error of their ways and convert to Christianity by the end. So, bad news for the Jews as a religion, but great news for Israel as a nation who happily took the aid and the weapons from the U.S. based on this very particular interpretation of Christian theology. Arm Israel to the teeth in the hopes that Armageddon would pop off sooner rather than later. Now, Carlson, on the other hand, wasn't having any of this end time Zionism. He is sourcing from the older version of anti Semitism, Christian nationalism. For him and Nick Fuentes, the Nazi sympathizing influencer Carlson recently platformed, the Jews are culturally and ethnically suspect, prone to scheming on a global scale, controlling media, finance, and politics, and cynically subverting the energies and resources of the United States. That's the Christian nationalist part. Jews were always the Christ killers and not to be trusted. And if you ever hear stories on your feed hinting darkly about globalists, financiers, George Soros, New World Orders, and the like, odds are you're hearing from an updated version of the Coke classic of the bunch, the 1903 forgery, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which ripped around Europe and helped seed the ground for Nazism in the 30s, then got revived in the 50s and 60s as the John Birch Society in America, and then got a refresh and a coat of paint just in time for COVID. Same playbook, just updated for our digital age. So, half of the Republican Party is all in supporting Israel based on their Christian Zionist belief that the rapture starts at Jerusalem. And half of the Republican Party are super suspicious of Jews based on cultural prejudices that they're scheming, manipulative, and not to be trusted with interfering in America's Christian nationalist project. But here's the really weird part. An exact mirror image of this schism is happening on the left as well. If you think back to the civil rights era of the 60s and 70s, Jewish Americans were at the forefront of those struggles. The Students for Democratic Society, the ACLU, the Anti-Defamation League all had strong Jewish participation, and often earlier and more consistently than their waspy neighbors. The phrase "never again" reminded them of their parents' generation's experience in the Holocaust, and they committed to standing up for injustice wherever they saw it. But fast forward to the last few years, especially after October 2023, and we see a totally different criticism coming from the left. Jews are no longer exhibit A of the oppressed and the marginalized people in the struggle. Now they're exhibit A of colonizers over an oppressed colonized people, the Palestinians. They are being coded by social justice advocates as white and colonizer, not as ethnic, victim, or the other. Now, there is tons more to discuss about these particular issues, including the difference between Netanyahu's Zionist government, the existence of Israel, and the experience of the Jewish diaspora. But for now, let's just sum things up. Both the right and the left are splintering between pro and anti Semitic branches right now, but for totally different reasons. For the Tucker Carlsons, Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, we should be suspicious of the Jews as a people because they're scheming and not to be trusted. But for the social justice left, we should be suspicious of Israelis as a nation because they're extending white colonialism and oppressing brown neighbors. Carlson's is an ethnic critique of the Jews and the oldest trope in the book. Gaza protesters is a political critique of Israel and a more recent outgrowth of Marxist decolonial studies. But in all of this, you want to know the real kicker? Jews and their Arab neighbors are all Semites. The term sprung up in 18th century Germany to describe all the children of Noah's son Shem. So they became Shemites. And it referred to the language group that includes Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, but not Persian and Turkish. It's just that the only Shemites that Europeans had any exposure to were the Ashkenazi Jews who'd settled there. So by the time the 20th century rolls around, anti Semitism got collapsed to mean anti Jew. But imagine if those neighbors remembered that they all shared the same Old Testament family. And if the rest of us could get a little clearer separating people from politics and work a little harder to ending wars and avoiding Armageddon, the war to end all wars.